So, what happens when you take these big green ideals and you slam them into the super fast paced, high stakes world of venture capital? Well, that's what we're going to dig into today. We're looking at the rise of ESG, that's environmental, social, and governance, and how it's starting to completely change the game for how startups get their funding. For the last few years, ESG has been a term that you hear everywhere. But is it just the flavor of the month, the latest corporate buzzword? Or has it actually become a core requirement for how you build and fund a business today? Well, the answer is changing, and it's changing a lot faster than you might think. So, why is this happening all of a sudden? Well, you just have to follow the money. The big institutional investors, the ones with the really deep pockets who fund the VC firms themselves, they're starting to make ESG commitments. And that pressure, it just rolls right downhill, straight to the venture capitalists, and then, of course, to the startups looking for investment. So yeah, for any founder out there trying to raise capital, this is the new normal. It's just not enough anymore to have a killer product and a solid business model. Investors are now asking, okay, but what's your ESG story? And maybe even more importantly, how can you prove it with data? The pressure is absolutely on. But this new demand, it created a massive problem, a real headache for the whole VC industry. Because while everyone wanted to do the right thing and integrate ESG, the actual process for doing it was a complete and total mess. Just try to picture this. For every single investment, lawyers on both sides, for the startup and the VC, had to basically invent ESG contract clauses from scratch. There was no playbook, no standard language, and this meant deals got bogged down in these endless negotiations, legal bills went through the roof, and the whole process just became slow and frustrating for everybody. And when you put the two side by side, the difference is just night and day, isn't it? We're trying to move from a world of vague promises, high costs, and a huge risk of greenwashing, just pretending to be sustainable, to a future that's all about clear expectations, faster deals, and real, actual accountability. Okay, so how do you get from that chaotic mess to this streamlined, sensible future? Well, that's where a brand new toolkit comes into play, one designed specifically to cure this VC headache. So meet Vima 2.0. You can think of it as a set of standard kind of plug-and-play legal documents for VC deals. The whole point is to cut out all that back and forth on the common stuff. And here's the real game changer. The latest version now includes a standard, ready-to-use ESG agreement. This quote just nails it perfectly. Instead of trying to build a totally new car from the ground up every time you want to go for a drive, you start with a proven, well-engineered blueprint, right? It just saves so much time, so much money, and it makes sure you don't forget any of the important parts. All right, so we've got this new blueprint, but what's actually in it? What does this standardized ESG agreement do that makes it so useful? Let's pop the hood and take a look inside. At its heart, this agreement really does four main things. It's a system. First, it verifies a company's claims. Second, it monitors their performance over time. Third, it protects the company's core mission. And fourth, it clearly defines everyone's obligations. Let's break down what each of those really means. So first up, verifying claims. This is done with something that lawyers call representations and warranties. Now, that sounds super technical, but all it really is a legally binding promise. The startup is officially stating that all the ESG info they provided is true and accurate. It puts facts, not just nice-sounding promises, right at the foundation of the deal. And that first step is a massive defense against greenwashing, which is, of course, the biggest risk here. But look, checking the facts at the very beginning is only half the story. You also have to make sure the company actually stays on the right path. And this is where ESG goes from being a one-time checkmark to a real living part of the business. The Vima agreement sets up clear rules for reporting on key metrics. It even says the company has to let investors know if something goes wrong. It creates this culture of continuous accountability, not just a snapshot in time. What's really smart about this whole framework is that it's not one size fits all. It gets that a tiny early-stage startup is different from a big, mature company. So as you can see, the obligations are tiered. A young company might just have to use its best efforts, but a later-stage company, they're expected to have formal systems, maybe even link executive pay to ESG goals. It lets companies grow into these commitments, which is just way more practical. Okay, so we've been deep in the details, the legal clauses, the different tiers. Let's zoom back out for a second. Why does having a toolkit like this matter so much right at this moment? Well, for both the founders and the investors, the payoff is huge. It helps them navigate all the new ESG regulations that are popping up. It protects everyone's reputation from any accusations of greenwashing. But honestly, the most important thing it does is it creates a clear, efficient process that takes ESG from this vague, feel good idea and turns it into a real contractual obligation that everyone agrees on. And that really brings us to the final, and I think the most critical question that every founder and investor has to be asking themselves now. Look, it's one thing to have a nice mission statement up on your website, but with standards like this becoming the new norm, the real test is this. Is your company's mission ready to be written into a legally binding contract? Because how you answer that question might just define the next generation of truly successful, sustainable companies.